Welcome to Wake Up Calls. This is Todd Goodwin. My wife Gina and I are board-certified hypnotists with years of experience empowering people to enjoy healthier and more fulfilling lives. There's a myth that hypnotists put people to sleep, but the truth is that we wake them up. So many people sleepwalk through life with no clue what causes their emotions and behaviors. They feel like helpless victims of their anxieties, bad habits, and traumas. Fortunately, we've helped thousands of clients to unlearn those issues, often quickly and easily. What if you could know yourself, accept yourself, and value yourself more than ever before? How would that improve every part of your life? It's possible, and it starts now with self-awareness. Our mission is to help you to wake up so you can think better, feel better, and do better. Podcast topics range from health and wellness to relationships to human behavior and psychology. Our conversations are always informative, often controversial, and sometimes entertaining. Get ready. It's time to wake up. Today we are going to discuss insomnia.
Insomnia is a big issue coming up for a lot of people, even people who might have never had issues with sleep or insomnia before. So this seems to be a topic that's pretty relevant right now.
Yeah, and that's it. So what we want to do is explain to you the variety of causes for insomnia. And by the way, insomnia, we're not going to give a clinical definition, but this is basically a word people use for trouble falling asleep. It can be disrupted sleep, where you wake up frequently throughout the night. It can be difficulty falling back to sleep. And there are a number of physical or physiological and mental and emotional causes. The focus of our conversation today is primarily on the mental and emotional side, because as hypnotists, that's our expertise. But anytime people are experiencing elevated stress, they tend to adopt certain stress-relieving habits or behaviors, right?
Yeah, a little way to blow off some steam or improve your mood really, really quickly, such as caffeine, or, maybe they're having extra coffee because they need to keep up with everything going on and chasing after a bunch of kids or something.
Sure.
People are therefore they're drinking more at night because they're so jacked up. They need alcohol to calm them down. And it also helps them relax, so it's like solving two problems at once in their minds.
For sure. And it's actually interesting because it's a vicious cycle. And if you think about the typical American, so people often start the day with flour and sugar, whether it's bagels, toast, pastries, donuts.
Artificial sweeteners in your coffee.
Exactly. So they're eating
Starbucks.
So they have sugar in form of carbohydrates. Very often people have a glass of fruit juice, which is extremely high. I mean, that's not good for you either. So if you start the day with a lot of carbohydrates plus coffee or any kind of caffeine, but coffee obviously is stronger than most tea, then there's this massive increase in blood sugar, and it causes a spike, which causes people to feel alert and awake, and their stress hormones kick up, which is what caffeine does. They're stimulated, and then throughout the day, that only lasts usually a couple hours. There's a dip. When the caffeine and the sugar wear off, they need more. Mm-hmm. And that's, typically in the workday, people have, a mid-morning coffee, or maybe coffee after lunch or with lunch. And what happens is people are so keyed up from sugar and caffeine throughout the day that at the end of the day, they need a beer, a wine, a mixed drink, something, happy hour, or do it at home. And the alcohol is a depressant or a sedative that's supposed to take the edge off all the sugar and caffeine that's been jacked up into the system. And by the way, soda, so it doesn't have to just be coffee. A lot of people drink Coke in the morning. And, there was a commercial once that showed a person, they didn't like coffee, but they're driving to work drinking a Coke. And in a way, if you're interested in sugar and caffeine, that makes sense.
It's not much different.
Good marketing.
Sugar and caffeine.
So anyway, they drink some alcohol, maybe when they get home. maybe with dinner, maybe after dinner. And of course, I'm drawing it, and I know you've experienced the same thing, Gina, with your clients, that this is a typical pattern. And so really people at an unconscious level are really just trying to balance themselves. So because there's still a lot of stimulation in the body from the chemicals, plus stress, which most people have to some degree, they need some kind of sleep aid, whether it's prescription, over-the-counter, herbal, in order to help them sleep. But if they've had alcohol or a lot of caffeine, even if they're not feeling it, it still can mess up their sleep. So they sleep poorly, they wake up the next morning, and guess what? They need more coffee and more sugar to stimulate, and it just becomes this roller coaster throughout the day.
Vicious cycle.
Exactly. So it's like, where does it start? Usually the remedy is to cut the alcohol and the caffeine at once, cut it in half and take it from there. But that's not what this conversation is about. We're talking about the mental aspect, the stress-related issues, and this is not a new problem. So we have an email. Do you want to read the highlights from the email from a reader of ours or listener of ours?
Yes. So Melissa from Miami. Yeah, she wrote, I've been under a lot of stress recently, been sleeping pretty poorly. I have trouble falling asleep, getting back to sleep. I know it's my monkey mind, but I can't turn it off. I've been taking sleep aids and I don't want to. Any suggestions?
Is that it?
And then she said, pun intended.
Oh. Okay, so if you don't know,
cute.
So I'm surprised I didn't catch that. It's a typical hypnotist joke is that one difference between what we do and what a psychotherapist does is that psychotherapists give advice, we give suggestions. Now, of course, when someone's hypnotized, thank you. When someone's hypnotized, the hypnotist is giving hypnotic suggestions. That's the term used for the words and things that we say.
Not commanding, not ordering.
Right. But it's called suggestions, so that's very funny. Nice job, Melissa. You totally went over my head.
That's why I picked her question.
Nice.
One of the reasons.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have complained about insomnia, but she kind of touched on everything here. So,
one of the suggestions I would suggest is a good visual exercise, and I'll have you explain it more, Todd. But the first thing I would suggest is a breathing exercise, whether or not you're going to do the second exercise or not, but breathing is good no matter what.
The first thing to realize is that if you're stressed, there's possibly an increase in adrenaline and cortisol, the two key stress hormones in your system. And cortisol, which is a chronic stress hormone, when people are under chronic stress, something bad may happen, and whether it's the economy or job or relationship or health, but an ongoing situation as opposed to adrenaline, which is more sudden, like someone cut me off on the highway and my heart's racing for 30 seconds and then it's done. So cortisol moves opposite to melatonin in terms of the cycle during the day, and cortisol, which incidentally goes up when you drink caffeine, is supposed to be dipping quite a bit at night when you go to bed, and your melatonin moves opposite, and melatonin is supposed to go up. This is not melatonin from the pharmacy. This is melatonin in your brain, and melatonin is necessary to help you sleep well. So, and by the way, one thing that, again, not mental, but if you're doing a lot of screen time,
or you're, good one.
Right before bed, or if your light bulbs are bright, you have a lot of light, then what the light does is it basically tells your brain it's still daytime, and so it inhibits melatonin production. And that's why sometimes it's good to have an hour or so before bed where you've dimmed the light significantly, and so that's one thing. But that aside, if you're stressed and your stress hormones are elevated and circulating in your body, usually the first thing that's good to do is an exercise to relax your body, and then we can relax or focus the mind, and then together that should help you fall asleep. What you were mentioning, Gina, is a 4-8-8 breathing pattern, which is to inhale for a count of 4, holding for a count of 8, approximately, and exhaling for a count of 8. So inhale 4, hold 8, exhale 8. And the main key thing that works here is the fact that your exhalation takes a lot longer than your inhalation, and that causes you to relax. It triggers a relaxation response, and it's not just calming physically, but it actually stimulates serotonin release, which is a precursor to melatonin. So without getting too complicated, that breathing, that especially if you're breathing abdominally from your stomach as opposed to shallow from your chest and shoulders, you're going to increase your serotonin, which is improving your well-being, increasing melatonin, and it relaxes you. So when you're laying in bed and you've put all your to-do list aside and the room is dark and comfortable and the right temperature, that's where doing that breathing for maybe 2 minutes is really good. And then the next step, as you find that relaxes you a lot, is to do something mentally. You want me to explain this, Gina?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a really cool technique that may only take a few minutes, but when I've done it myself and when I've recommended it to clients, usually we have found that, and I know I've found this because I've done it a lot, I fall asleep somewhere in the middle of it, and then later on when I wake up, hours later or the next morning, I don't even remember finishing it, which means I fell asleep somewhere in the middle, which is really what you want.
Exactly.
So basically, here's an easy way to do this. Imagine your childhood home, assuming you had a pleasant childhood. We don't want to, if you were abused as a child, don't imagine your childhood home. But, seriously.
A place well, maybe the school you went to, or a playground you went to a lot, or some place that you're very, very, very familiar with.
That's not stressful. So it could be a vacation spot.
Right. And this is a really good exercise because whether you're a visual person, auditory person, it's good for that, because you can imagine if you're more of a visual auditory person like I am, I would picture what I remember seeing because I'm very visual. So I would be able to see it very clearly. So I would imagine the colors. I would imagine the way things are moving, if things are moving. I would imagine distance, how far things are. And a little auditory too. So if I was outside, maybe I could hear the plane going overhead, or the breeze, or any other sounds I would hear when I was there, and so on and so forth. If you're kinesthetic, maybe you can pick up one of your stuffed animals that you had as a kid if you're in your childhood home and feel it.
Kinesthetic is, so we all process information slightly differently. Some people, like Gina was mentioning, are predominantly visually oriented. Some people are more hearing oriented, and the others are more feeling oriented. That's kinesthetics. So, and
this is almost like the beginning understandings of very, very basic NLP, is it not?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, is understanding that visual, auditory, kinesthetic, most people are one of the three or a blend of all three.
Yeah, I think we all are blends, but some people are more, dominant. But again, you're right. If you blend all of this, regardless of what you think you might be, imagine walking through that environment and imagining as vividly as you can, like you're actually in that situation.
And remembering as best as you can.
Sure. And again, it doesn't matter if this is done right. The key is just to do it. And the reason why this works primarily is because vividly imagining something taxes the conscious mind. And so your conscious mind may, if you don't do that and you're just laying in bed, it may start thinking about different things that you think are important at the time but may not be. After all, what are you really going to resolve at bedtime? So by giving your conscious mind something to focus on, and by tapping into these different sensory experiences, seeing, hearing, feeling, not only if you're imagining something pleasant can it be a really nice way to revisit a situation, but it also gives you a temporary escape from your current environment. So if you're in your imagination vividly going somewhere where you have pleasant associations, then not only do you feel better, but also you're really taxing your mind, and then that is going to usually exhaust your mind, and then that causes you to fall asleep if you're physically relaxed.
Right. The good part about it being something that you can get your brain to focus on is because your brain at that moment before doing that is almost like wild horses, and so then you finally get the reins and you can just guide them in the right direction, and with all of their power, now they know what direction to go to. All at the same time, instead of one going here, one going there, and their brain's just going off in all different directions. You're giving your brain direction, and then you become control of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, And if it begins to drift off into some random thought again, you can go back and focus on what you were focusing on. It gives you something to focus on.
And actually, I'll also take the opportunity to mention that this type of technique actually induces a light state of hypnosis. Mm-hmm. And as we go between being wide awake to being asleep, we move through the hypnotic state. So hypnosis is a precursor to sleep if you want to sleep. It's also the reason why if you're thinking about something that's distressing or worrying at bedtime, very often that disrupts your sleep. It can cause you to have unpleasant dreams. So you want to be very careful about what you're thinking at bedtime and as you wake up, because those are times when your brain goes through a state of hypnosis. So what you're focusing on at that time is going to stick with you a lot longer than at any other time of the day. So that's a simple 2-part technique that I would highly recommend for dealing with difficulty falling asleep. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can do this again and do the breathing, do the visualization, and that usually works really well.
Didn't you also do math in your head once?
Oh yeah, that's right.
You can also just do a bunch of math.
That's
and
true.
You'll check out, your mind will check out real quick.
Yeah, so, we're not talking...
Like long division.
And so again...
I'd be asleep in a second.
Well, that's the point, because it's taxing. It's not stressful. I mean, unless you were traumatized in a math class.
Here it is, because you're picturing the numbers and you're seeing, and you have to remember where they are, and that's how I would do it, because I'm very visual. So I would picture the numbers out, and then I just get tired of it, and I end up falling asleep.
Yep. And I mean, have you had the experience where you fall asleep without noticing you're stopping the math? Like in the middle of trying to figure it out?
I've definitely noticed that I start to wander and then I go back, and then eventually I don't remember.
Well, this is one reason why the old cliche advice about counting sheep is helpful, because one, you're counting, and that can be monotonous and repetitive. But two, you're picturing sheep.
Mm-hmm. You're engaging your imagination, your creative mind.
Right. What we've just recommended is vastly more robust than counting sheep, but it works in the same principle. I do want to mention one other thing, actually, because I've had, and I know you have as well, but I've had a lot of clients who had insomnia issues that were due to an overactive mind or due to just being stressed around bedtime. And it had nothing to do with normal everyday stress. I'll give you a couple really quick examples. One client actually had panic attacks at bedtime, which, if you think about it, is awful, because of all the times when you need to feel safe and relaxed, it's when you're about to fall asleep. I believe a doctor told him he had sleep apnea, and it was possible he could stop breathing, which is part of apnea, but he could actually die in his sleep. So the doctor basically negatively hypnotized him to believing he could die when he slept.
Oh my God.
So
I felt that just now. It's like, man.
I know, of all places, of all times of the day to feel, threatened. So he started having panic attacks just as he was about to fall asleep. And
thinking he might die that night.
Yeah, and even though he knew logically that was unlikely, the fear was there. And so that just became a phobia of falling asleep. So we resolved that, changed that belief, and he was able to sleep again. 2 other clients I can think of that had specifically traumatic events, and both were dependent on Unisom or some other types of sleep medications. One was a client who had had an abortion 3 years earlier, and she said she was over it. It was not a big deal. I was a little skeptical of that, and I said, if you were really over it, and that's when your insomnia began, maybe you're not over it. And so it turned out we really didn't focus on the sleep. We just focused on resolving the trauma, which is one of our specialties, of course, you and I. And she was afraid of going to bed without Unisom, and she was able to actually sleep through the night. And as of a few years later, when I last talked to her, she had not taken it at all, and she was able to sleep through the night. Another one was traumatized in a horrific situation where she basically found her husband's dead body. He had committed suicide with a gun, so he had shot himself in the head, and she found him. So for 10 years, she had not been able to sleep well.
Wasn't he sitting in the car?
His car, yeah.
Oh my
it was
God.
at like 4 or 5 in the morning. So
picture that. Oh my God.
So she was, she was also abusing, alcohol, cigarettes, cocaine, and sleep medication.
She must have felt guilty and.
Yep.
Oh man.
But anyway, the point is that resolving the trauma allowed her mind to be at rest and quiet, and so she was able to sleep. So
Makes a lot of sense.
For sure. And that's why sometimes, the way we approach things, it sounds very simple, but very often it really is simple. And if you focus on insomnia as the underlying problem, it's going to be really difficult to resolve it. But if you recognize it as a symptom of any number of potential causes and you account for each of those causes, you can resolve it. And quickly and usually, we can't ever guarantee results or say that something's permanent. But if you have weeds growing in your garden and you pull them up by the roots, you know for sure that weed will never grow again. There may be new weeds that come in, and then you just have to deal with that. Anyway, we'll save that for another conversation, but that's my take on insomnia or sleep issues. Any other thoughts you want to add there?
Sweet dreams. See you in the morning for your next wake-up call.
Yes, sleep well, and then after you've slept well, it will be time to wake up again. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share it with others who might benefit too. Follow our podcast at www.goodwinwakeupcalls.com to be notified as new episodes are released. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to address, email wakeupcalls@goodwinhypnosis.com and visit goodwinhypnosis.com if you'd like our help to overcome a personal challenge. We'll talk to you soon.